There's no need to introduce Aodhán. I think it's fair to say that those of us who have been covering this issue for a long time, the landscape has changed quite dramatically in the last year, and that is in no small part to, I suppose, how Aodhán has approached the subject. And Jonathan has been working on this area for a long time in the Cork Local Drugs Task Force, and has obviously some personal insights into this area, which we will probably touch on as we go along. It would seem appropriate that, given the tragedy down in Cork, that we might start with that, with the death of Alex Ryan. Can I ask you, Jonathan, what kind of, I suppose, insights do you have into that, and what lessons do you think we should learn from it?
I think when the incident happened and following the passing of Alex, there was a genuine sense of shock in the area. Most of our drug focus in Cork would have been on heroin abuse, and to a lesser extent street tabs, scripts. And this type of drug really wouldn't have been well known, but having looked at it in recent days, it's very, very clear that it's a growing issue. We still don't know the extent of the use of this particular drug, psychoactive drugs, in Cork, and I would imagine that is the same throughout the state. I think the issue with it is because they're changing so often. You know, what you might be taking this week could be something totally different next week. They're constantly coming up with new derivatives of the drug, and people genuinely don't know what is contained within it, and that is the scary part about it. The lessons we need to learn, obviously there is a huge education side of it for policymakers. I think it's a bit of a wake-up call, certainly for me as a policymaker, that sometimes we get caught up in focusing on the headline drugs, such as the heroin, such as the cannabis, such as the street tabs, and we kind of take our eye off the ball when it comes to these very dangerous psychoactive drugs. So there's certainly a bit of education for us as policymakers in how we approach that. I know Aodhán has done huge work in the area, and I commend him on that, because without the likes of Aodhán, I don't think we would even be further down the line to where we are right now, in terms of being able to openly talk about the possibility of decriminalisation. You know, the political establishment usually shies away from these issues. They're not popular issues in constituencies. Nobody wants to stand up and say we want to have a medically supervised injecting centre in our community. But I always say to people, look, this is on your doorstep already. So you either address it from a public health point of view, or you keep criminalising people. And you keep criminalising people, then you're going to keep having incidents like we had in Cork recently.
Minister, do you have any thoughts on what, I suppose, the country could learn from this tragedy?
Well, yeah. Again, very similar to what Jonathan has said. I suppose the poly drug use issue is becoming one of the biggest problems we have. This, you know, the use of cannabis, alcohol, and prescription drugs, and other types of psychoactive substances as well. Just when you get in behind the layer of the reportage of this particular incident in Cork, and you sometimes look at some of the comments online and what people are saying, it doesn't take long for the blame culture to come back, and for the victimisation of the victim to come back, and for people to make very, you know, stupid comments about, well, you know, putting blame on, again, the person who was involved in the drug taking themselves. And this is, I think, what the entire context of this debate is all about. It's about shame, and it's about stigma, and that isn't working for anybody. And what young people say to me, and I'm quite sure to Jonathan as well, is that, look, we would listen to your messages if they weren't shrouding such lies, because we know what our parents were doing during the Celtic Tiger era. We know that this country is a completely dysfunctional relationship with alcohol, and yet you're moralising about us and our drug taking. I was involved in the student unions. Another student union have a What's in the Pill campaign, and again there'll always be criticism saying, well, something you're facilitating, or you're in some way placidly giving a kind of an allowance to people to dabble or to experiment. But I think unless we have information and unless we empower people to make their own decisions with their own bodies, well then we're not going to get very far. I think many people say we've moved away from the just say no mantra, and I think that's welcome. But I think the just say no mantra still has a lot of resonance in Irish society. I think we need to really to stamp that out.
I think both yourself and Minister Varadkar were asked about the drug testing issue of tablets, and there's a campaign which you yourself were at, Minister, a while ago with some of the students' unions. Is that something that could help deal with this particular issue of these particular substances, some of which are hard to detect? There's no substance to detect because we don't actually know the chemical substance, and the tests can't test for them. Is there, I suppose, a harm reduction approach? It was mentioned during the morning that that's what we have in this country, or at least that's what we should be aiming for. Is there a harm reduction approach that could respond to this particular threat? We know from the European Union that there's about 450 of these substances at the moment, and they're increasing every year. And in the region of 700 websites that are supplying these things. So how can we devise a response, Minister, to what is an area that just seems to be going to just get worse?
Yeah, I remember actually one of the first interviews I did in relation to psychoactive substances. I made a comment that 20 years ago we were dealing with 20 substances, and now we're dealing with 420. And I got a lot of laughter online, because apparently 420 is a byword for and what's the Minister making a kind of a smart aleck remark. Apparently 420 in the afternoon is the time when kids in America used to come together and smoke pot. So you learn as you go in this line of work. On the pill testing idea, I don't know. I mean, I want to be an open-minded person. I want to be somebody who's happy to discuss anything in terms of harm reduction measures. Certainly, what we have to exhaust is the education line. What we have to exhaust is the public awareness campaign type initiatives. We had 679 drug and alcohol-related deaths in Ireland in 2013. 679 people died because of drug and alcohol-related issues in 2013. So that's a massive crisis. Now, not all of those were related to psychoactive substances, but a fifth of those were related to heroin. But certainly anything that can save a life should certainly be investigated. Is the pill testing idea one that we should pursue? Look, I'm open-minded. I do have certain concerns about it. I do have concerns that people go into a nightclub and test a pill, and it would say this is safe to take, and then there's a very violent reaction from that person, and it doesn't end well, and then recrimination start. But look, I think essentially what we want to do is to empower anybody of any age group to know what they're taking, to know what they're doing, and to be empowered with the information as to how toxic or potentially dangerous these substances are.
Jonathan, you on this, when there is an overdose or a toxic reaction situation, that you can have a situation where people are actually afraid to contact the authorities because it is a criminal matter. Can you elaborate on that, and maybe you can give an example of your own personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, that is an issue, there's no doubt about it. I mean, people may or may not be aware, but I have a brother, my only brother, who is a heroin addict, and I've received phone calls in the early hours of the morning to say that he is overdosed, and I need to come and get him and bring him to the emergency department. Now, the reason the people do that is because they're afraid to call the authorities. And we've had deaths in Cork where people have been at parties or house parties where the use of street drugs and heroin have been used, and unfortunately people have overdosed and they've been left in the house. It's the following morning people are finding them. People are afraid to contact the authorities because of this fear of being criminalised. And I think criminalisation hasn't worked. It just hasn't worked. And as policy makers, we need to recognise that. There have been many, many incidents where people's lives could have been saved if the emergency services were called and there was no fear of recrimination for other individuals who may have been in the same locality or engaged in the same behaviour. That is just the reality on the ground. Unless we move to a policy of decriminalisation, and I have to say that my own party is opposed to decriminalisation. Now, since being appointed drug spokesperson, I'm drafting a new drugs policy which will be presented to the Ardèche in April. And I'm strongly pushing that the party changes its stance on this. One, with what the Minister is doing in terms of medically supervised injecting centres, you're going to have some level of decriminalisation anyway. I don't think it's possible to have these harm reduction centres and continue with a criminalisation policy. As I said, criminalisation has failed, it is costing lives, and us as policy makers need to recognise that. And we need to be leaders and go out and sell that message to those who would be opposed to decriminalisation. And let's not underestimate the lobby groups that are out there who would oppose any form of decriminalisation. You know, they are very strong, they are very loud, and I think it's only in recent times that we're having a very serious debate about the advantages, the consequences of being able to have a policy which decriminalises the user. And I think that is the best approach that we can take as policy makers. And as I said, even within Leinster House, if you take the 166 TDs, I would say the vast majority of them would be opposed to what Aodhán is trying to do. You would have very supportive individuals within each party, but it is not one of those issues which is at the top of the political agenda, which unfortunately is a sad reflection on us as a society and as a political establishment.
Minister, the election's coming up.
I know this.
Yes. And you're going to be under a lot of pressure, I'd say. But this issue of decriminalisation, is it going to just dissipate now with the change of administration, or is the genie out of the bottle? And do you sense, I know the Oireachtas Justice Committee, which Sinn Féin were part of, they did agree that the Portuguese model should be looked at. Is there a willingness at senior departmental level and at political level to seriously examine this issue? Do you think it is something that won't just dissipate with your departure?
Well, who says I'm going? All right. Well, first of all, can I say, just in terms, I mean, John's absolutely right. If and when we bring in, the supervised injecting centre, that does require a level of decriminalisation of possession in that particular location. That should where it will be. And I want actually to thank John for the support he's given. The political football has been taken out of this one, really, and we do have a good conversation across parties on this issue. And actually, yourself, Cormac, and actually Maria are part responsible for the injecting centre getting somewhere, because I was kind of advised not to go to a particular event which had been hosted by Anna Liffey, which were promoting the idea of a medically supervised injecting centre almost a year ago, and they presented the idea. I was asked to say a few words. I said that seems like a reasonable suggestion, and then all of a sudden after the event, yourself and Maria and Sharon there put microphones in front of my nose and said, "Did you really think it's a good idea?" Yeah, it seems like a good idea. Next day, front page, Irish Examiner, Minister supports injecting centre proposal. So I kind of had to go with it now. But first of all, can I just say that the decriminalisation debate is not a substitute for real discussion about about investment in recovery, about the paltry state of what we have for those in recovery, about the issues that we have nationwide about services for people. It's not a substitute for that. I just want to say that first of all. I think the problem with the issue around decriminalisation is probably the word, because people don't understand it. They don't understand what it means. And I think, as John has quite rightly said, we're not. See, when I thought decriminalisation, people automatically assume, oh, you mean decriminalisation of cannabis, right? And I say, no, I'm talking about decriminalisation of the individual. That's what we're talking about, decriminalisation of the individual. If we get started the debates about decriminalising this substance or that substance, it becomes a debate about the substance rather than about the individual. I don't think it makes any sense, and John has described it quite well. What if you have a parent in somewhere in Ireland who discovers one of these tablets in their kid's school bag or their college bag? Are they less or more likely to intervene if they feel their child is going to get a criminal sanction? I would say less likely. And that's the standpoint of groups like Citywide, and it's one I'm absolutely convinced is the way to go. If you look at the Portuguese model, what's happened over a 15-year period is that the number of people who have died from heroin overdoses or from heroin addiction has gone down by about 75%. The number of people receiving treatment for heroin addiction has halved. So if our job is to save lives, but then obviously we have to look internationally at models that work. Now, the Portuguese model isn't perfect. Some people will be very maybe ill at ease with the idea of having 10 days supply, that's the cut-off point, if you like, for interaction with that person. But what happens in Portugal is that it's not cheap, the decriminalisation model. They have these dissuasion committees where people are interviewed and asked to go on a journey to discuss their drug use, and there can be sanctions at the end of the day. There can be fines, and there can be restrictions of travel, and there can be a criminal sanction eventually if somebody isn't playing ball. But I suppose what we're trying to do is to take this out of the courtroom and take it out of the prison system and take it out of the Garda station. And the statistic that's been given to me by Citywide, which I think is shocking, that 70% of the drug convictions in this country are for possession for personal use. What a waste of time. What an absolute and complete waste of time. And if something is not working, then why are we still doing it? It's ridiculous. I mean, why are we spending so much Garda time and court service time tackling the victims of this thing, when we should probably be spending more of our time tackling the pushers? Now, what I say about the political reaction to it, I mean, I thought maybe it would be a hard sell to get the injecting centre idea over the line. But then once you engage with people and describe what we're actually trying to achieve here, then people are more likely to come on board with your point of view. It will be in the Labour Party manifesto to pursue the Portuguese model of harm reduction. Again, while journalists like yourself, Cormac and Maria and others have been very supportive of this discussion, it does sometimes frustrate that, when I talk about decriminalisation, or Jonathan does, or anybody in the political sphere does, the word legalisation creeps in almost immediately. And you do find yourself trying to ring up editors saying, "Will you please not talk about legalisation, because that's not what we're talking about." It's all about the human response. I met, just the last thing I'd say, I met at the Service Users Forum yesterday. And from a human rights perspective, what we're asking people who are suffering from addiction to do is quite appalling. And we're moving away from it. The whole urine testing stuff, the stuff that lots of other countries have moved away from a long time ago, and we're still persisting with it. And they have strong voices and they want to be heard, but what actually really hurts them, and hurts the capacity for us to change, is the shame and the stigma that attaches to this whole area. That parents can't say, "Look, yes, my child has an addiction. Stop blaming me, and stop assuming things about me or my family. There's an addiction. It's something that we don't want to battle our way through." And I think collectively, we have to make the J word as unacceptable to say as the N word or the K word. Let's stop describing people who have addictions as being little more than junk. Because if you do that, then you dehumanize them, and then you make them, in the public perception, less worthy of intervention and of help. And I think that's the very least we could do for people who need our assistance.
The next national drug strategy has started, I think, has it?
Yeah.
Is there a space in that for giving, say, the drug users forum some sort of voice or representation, either in that strategy or at the departmental committee?
Yeah, and that's what they want. and also the family support network also wants a seat on the table, and that's been achieved. I think, you know, we have to move away from the idea that those who are greatly affected by this are people who are talked about and not listened to. I know this is challenging for people to get their head around how we should change things. But I think if we raise the bar of our expectation, and I would again pay great credit to Caoimhín Ó Caoimhín and to John O'Brien that this hasn't become a kind of a, you know, you're soft on drugs type debate in the Oireachtas. In terms of the drugs debate, it actually has become something I think we can all collectively achieve together. Because often in other countries what happens is that in political sphere, you stand up and start talking about decriminalisation, and you're accused of being soft on drugs, you're accused of being soft on crime, you're accused of being, you know, somebody who doesn't really care that much. And Nick Clegg is somebody who battled and lost this in Britain, and I met him a few times. And he said it was very difficult to get any space for this type of argument here. But I think if the stats back up what you're trying to say, and if the humanity of what you're trying to pursue, you know, shines through, then people will react well to it. I have to say, I haven't met one person when I'm canvassing who has given me a negative reaction to what I'm saying in the drugs area, because I think for many people it actually makes sense. And it is very refreshing, I think, when people realise that people across the political spectrum are willing to give it a go. Certainly those who are using addiction services. When I meet a woman from Portlaoise who has to get a bus to Trinity Court every day and home again, I mean, I can't imagine how she's still doing that and not maybe, you know, sitting in front of that bus and demanding that she get a better service where she lives. Because I think that's what I would do. This person needs medical help, and she's travelling every day on a bus to Dublin in a very vulnerable situation, you know, circumstance to get what she needs. So the voice of those in addiction and their families, they have to be central to what we're trying to achieve. Otherwise, we're just talking about them.
Jonathan, obviously, what do you think about that?
I would agree completely with Aodhán. There is no doubt there is a stigma, and that's one of the things we have to address. I mean, my brother is not a junkie. My brother is somebody who has an addiction. My brother is somebody who needs medical help. He doesn't need to be criminalised. Unfortunately, he has been criminalised. He has a criminal record because of his addiction. But at the end of it, he's still my brother. I'm no better than him, and he's no worse than me. And we need to start looking at people who use drugs as individuals who, for whatever reason, have gone down a road that in other circumstances they may not have. We also need to look at the issue of there are people who use drugs for medicinal purposes, and by continually having a policy of criminalisation, you are actually preventing people from having medical intervention, in my opinion. I mean, my father had mortar neurons, and when he passed away from mortar neurons, in his last number of weeks, people were recommending that he would use cannabis. Now, he never did, because it was illegal. But, you know, I firmly believe that if he was able to use cannabis in his last few months, it would have certainly eased his pain. So I don't think it's right for us as policy makers to dictate to people whether they can use drugs such as cannabis for medicinal purposes. I don't think it's right for us to stigmatise people, to criminalise people, and there's a lot of work being done by advocacy groups out there who are doing a lot of lobbying on the politicians. And I think there is a culture change within the Oireachtas. I think this particular dial has seen a huge turnover of TDs. I think we had 80 new TDs coming into this Oireachtas. And you can see the advantages of that. I mean, we had a marriage equality referendum. We're having more open discussions around decriminalisation of drugs, of the individual. And I think that the political atmosphere is changing, but we all need to show leadership in this. I mean, Aodhán cannot do it on his own. I mean, I really have huge admiration for what Aodhán has done since he's come into the portfolio. I think he's totally transformed it. It's no longer just a position that somebody becomes a spokesperson for drugs and actually just sits there and just implements existing policy. I think there is a huge commitment on behalf of Aodhán to change the policy, and he's right. This has not been used as a political football, and politics has been taken out of it, and I think that it has been to the advantage of the debate. And I certainly hope that in the next Dáil, as much as I don't want to see Labour in government,
You're doing so well there, bro.
but, you know, if Labour do end up in government again, which, you know, remains to be seen, I certainly would hope that Aodhán would continue his work as a drug spoke, as the minister, the junior minister dealing with this area, because I think he has been a breath of fresh air. And that's difficult for me to say, probably 3 or 4 weeks out from an election. But it's one of these issues where we just have to take the politics out of it. We have to do what's best for the individual, and we have to do what's best for society. Criminalising people who use drugs is not working. I mean, you know, and people will have this debate probably throughout the election. And like Aodhán, nobody has raised it on the doors with me. And if they have, it's been in a very positive way. I mean, this is an issue that affects communities, and communities want to do what's best by the individual and also by their own community. And, you know, so hopefully Aodhán will be re-elected as the only Labour TD, and he'll end up in the position he is. And if he's not, I can assure him that I will take up the mantle and I will carry on his good work.